I'm joined today by three very distinguished people, two of which I've worked with for decades and one of which I've worked with for the last 4 or 5 years. And to be honest, for myself and Jeff and Mithat, this is probably the first time that the three of us have actually been on a stage wearing jackets ever. I would like to say I've probably gone to a little bit more effort than you guys, but that's all right. That's okay. Jeff runs global supply chain for Microsoft Devices business. Mithat is the president of tech for Arvado Supply Chain Solutions. And Ron is executive vice president here at Overhaul and looks after everything to do with intelligence. So our conversation today is going to talk a little bit about 2025, 2026, some of the things that we've seen, some of the things that we're expecting to see next year. So with that, when I think about 2025, for me, it boils down to one word when it comes to supply chain, and that word is tariff. Everything else seemed to get lost in the mix as we spent the year trying to figure out, are we doing the right thing? Do we have the right strategies? Have we thought about tariffs in the right way? I worry that we might have stalled from a supply chain evolution perspective, even with all of this great technology happening around us. Jeff, what do you think?
Tariff. I can't say that we've stalled. And in fact, in some ways, I think we've accelerated. If you think about the concept of very long supply chains and how do you cope with it, I think there's areas that we've had to accelerate that perhaps took us off the long game. But I think the long game, we're able to develop roadmaps, stick to them, and things like that. But for sure, I think tariffs and mitigations and things like that around them, as well as the network design, has absolutely been a paramount over the last few years, as is mitigation in terms of resilience.
So Mithat, you in your industry, you see across the board, you see consumer electronics, you see healthcare, devices, everything. Were tariffs that big hit for you last year, or what else was going on?
So I think it was not a surprise, right? It was already announced that something will happen with tariffs. I think the extent and the scale hit the people with a bit of a surprise. And back to your question, what we felt is there was a lot of strategic decisions were paused, actually. So there was obviously a lot of people looked at manufacturing footprint, what they need to do, but all other decisions were a little bit paused, what we felt. No big decision on moving between vendors, etc., what we saw also in our pipeline, for example.
And so was this the start of a change in globalization strategy? Or did you start to see the biggest companies in the world start to move away from that, start to think about, we need to be closer to home, we need to be thinking about more postponement types of work? Or can you not answer that question?
No, I can. And I need to smile because, it's not a surprise that companies have difficulties with their forecast, obviously. Either we have too little inventory or we have too many inventory in our warehouses. We did see a shift to nearshoring or even onshoring from a fulfillment perspective into the US, which helped us actually from a top-line perspective definitely last year.
And so, Jeff, as you think about strategies going forward, what are you seeing companies, are they still concerned about the 2025 tariff scenario, or are they starting to get over it? Because in my head, it's always a short, medium, long-term thing. And what we hear in the press and what we tend to spend a lot of time talking about is the short-term impact. And my guidance to a lot of companies last year was, hurry up and wait. If you make a strategic decision around a tariff on any given day, nearly to the point of guaranteeing it would change sometime in the relative short term. And companies shouldn't make strategic decisions, long-term manufacturing decisions, on a whim. You sit in a lot of different industry forums. What was that chat?
It's an interesting one because, without getting into tariffs specifically and anyone's response to it, one of the things that comes to mind is the adaptability component, and when you look across the supply chain and how everything is synchronized, do I have an adaptable logistics network? Do I have an adaptable manufacturing network? And then all the way back to my source. And do I have an adaptable place where I'm sourcing, from which I'm sourcing to convert? And then do I have adequate ways to sense demand and feed that all into the system? And so I think irrespective of whatever those demands are, whatever disruption is, does it change the need to be able to adapt each one of those things? No. And so I think in that regard, it's sort of a state of the course. But I think there's business decisions around tariffs specifically that do it. I just think that the constant is this thing to think about.
Got it. Okay. So Ron, you spend your role on the dark side of supply chain. You worry about all the bad things that have to happen, and you continually have to find the ways of getting ahead of those bad things. Did the, if you like, displacement in supply chain last year, did that cause the criminal elements to start thinking and working in a different way?
The short answer to the question is yes, but the criminal element that we're battling every day is very adaptive, and they spend their days thinking how to manipulate logistics networks, how to get into logistics networks, how to maneuver to steal loads, and their tactics are changing on a weekly basis. If they only got to get right once. They can try 10 times or 100 times. If they get it right once, they're in the money. But just I think looking back over the last 5 years, the disruption during the initial days of COVID really enabled a lot of criminal organizations to grow and target freight with impunity. They weren't even getting caught for the most part. And we're seeing that evolve. We're seeing copycat criminals. We're seeing tactics that move from the U.S. into Europe. One of the latest criminal kind of tactics that we're battling is the criminals are just getting their people hired on as drivers, and using that as an avenue to get into cargo, into steel cargo. I've been in this space quite a while, and when I first started in this industry, we rarely, if ever, saw a driver involved in a theft. But that is a big chunk of the theft today, is where drivers are involved, are part of the criminal network, and that's the battle we're facing in the U.S., and we're starting to fight that same battle in Europe as well.
So where I'm heading with this is the criminals are very clever in terms of being able to adapt. As they adapt, they continually look for the weakest point in the supply chain. So they've figured out that supply chain, we used to think that all crime was opportunistic. The typical cargo theft was the scene from Goodfellas, where they stop the truck, they take the driver out, they give him a brown envelope, they give him a little tap in the head, and then they drive away in the truck. Of course, it's not quite like that anymore, and this is very, very deep organized crime.
How do you feel about prohibition?
And yes, so some laws have changed as well in the meantime. But the criminals are becoming a lot more sophisticated. And because of that, supply chains have become very decentralized over the last 5 or 10 years as the consumer has really started to play that role. As you think about where we are, so Ron will tell you a lot of very scary stories about how supply chains have been infiltrated by these criminal gangs. And we're talking international gangs at this stage. What does it mean to you as you think about your strategies for 2025? Have we moved the dial in any aspect of supply chain? How worried and how concerned are you about this growing threat from the criminal community? I'm going to ask Jeff to start. It's Jeff to start with.
I think of it a couple ways. One is, for a long time we've talked about this, holy grail being a predictable supply chain. Predictability, kind of no matter what you throw at it. And what do cartels and the bad actors actually prey on? Predictability. And so we have these two converging things, and I actually think that we need to evolve to more of precision supply chain that operates to spec, costs, time, et cetera, that you can change an operating model pretty quickly. But we also need to be able to partner because there's no one company alone that is going to solve the problem, but you can be a harder target. And so I think from our standpoint, it's keep being adaptable and instill that everywhere, but also integrate across in a synchronized way so that you can have a supply chain designed for spec and precision.
That makes sense. And so it's more precision. It's more with a scalpel.
And the other part is I think the scarcity of sources drives a secondary channel, to Ron's point. And the fact of the matter is those secondary channels, sometimes if you're on the sort of the supply chain in the back end, not appreciating how those channels actually cannibalize your main channels. And so there's many strategies that I think can be deployed beyond hardening pure supply chain aspects.
And so in that vein, predictability is our friend, but also, if you like, one of our problems. So Ron, as you see some of these technologies in particular that the criminal gangs are using, what are some of the latest things that you've seen?
You know, my answer to that, you know, in the last many years, logistics industry has digitized, and a lot of those tech stacks were not put in place with fraudulent activity in mind. The industry's done a good job at kind of filling some gaps from a technology standpoint and minimizing criminal infiltration. But what I want to say is that they're going to evolve and find ways to do it different. If you put a blocker in one area, it's a balloon squeeze. They're going to go somewhere else. There's a lot of companies that we work with that have very little to no theft, but their security programs have been in place for years or decades and very mature. The processes are well defined, and they're in lockstep, from a security standpoint, not only with their logistics providers, but all the way down to the driver level. And those, it does take it's a team sport to mitigate these risks and have an effective program that is loss-free.
So Mithat, as the supply chains have continued to evolve, we went through, if you like, the Amazon effect of everything was about speed. And then it shifted slightly to be all about convenience. And then it reverted back to speed. And now I think it's speed and convenience. And we have these incredible different supply chain signals, like whenever we have something on Instagram or something on TikTok, from an influencer perspective, we can spike demand of a product overnight. As somebody who's running a global supply chain, how do you deal with that variability?
So the most important thing is you need to be close with the client, right? I mean, when they run any promotion, any sales, etc., normally we are pretty well informed, and they have a pretty good understanding what will happen actually. So we plan accordingly, what in terms of operational capacity in the fulfillment centers, but also with the partners who are the carriers, the transportation companies. So normally that works quite well actually. Where I'm like more, and this is maybe also a question for Ron because you mentioned it, where we see, so from a security perspective, our fulfillment center become more and more sophisticated so that we can avoid the risk actually, but the interface to the carrier and to make sure that the right driver comes and the right truck we load, that remains always like the interface. That's the biggest risk for us actually on behalf of our clients. And that is, we implemented yard management, we integrated it with our warehouse management system. We have identity checks, which are not integrated as a standalone solution. I think these are areas which, if I may, which bothers me actually, which we haven't solved. But we did progress last year on these items, but we haven't solved that particular issue actually.
You're spot on with the vulnerability, and when a driver shows up to pick up a load, having two-factor authentication to ensure that the right driver, the right truck, the right company is validated upon entering the yard. And it's something new, I think, to the industry. Historically, if a driver showed up with a pickup number, there was very little validation of if that individual was the right person. But the threat environment is demanding that additional step at the point of pickup. It's too much at risk. And it has to be validated and revalidated because the criminals are smart. They will find ways or attempt to penetrate those operations and get their hands on a load. I get a lot of alerts and notifications to my inbox every day, and I'm getting 20, 30 alerts a day where a driver just walked away with a truck. It picked up a load and turned off communication, turned off their GPS, and it's gone. And there's very little recourse and very little, without proper procedures, there's very little a company can do to get that back.
So this kind of feels to me like the bad actors are doing great. And did we slow down a little bit in 2025? I'm not gonna blame anybody. I'm just gonna say that's kind of what it feels like. So what's your thoughts for 2026? So as we're now in the second month of the year, as you think about supply chain evolution in particular in 2026, Jeff, what are your thoughts? What are you looking for? What do you think we're going to see?
I think a few things. Number one, I think accelerate transformation is a big one. We just talked about digitizing various processes across the supply chain, but I think there's huge opportunities to go deeper than I think most people think, including myself. You just talked about the handoff with the driver, what happens in the yard, what happens on the dock. A lot of times those relationships actually lead to these types of things. And so I think there's actually more to be digitized, but I think there's going to be a tremendous focus on laying the digital foundation, meaning the data foundation, where we have it in many cases in silos at most companies I talk to, in silos, and I think there's an opportunity to make sure that those silos become connected so that the synchronization can actually start to happen. That's one layer. The second layer is, there's a point where the bits can move faster than the boxes and the people. So I'll focus on the people. Like the talent pipeline has got to be this perpetual pipeline of talent that has the capacity to unlearn, learn, and kind of be in this cycle that's fairly continuous, but still grasping the practical application of things. Because we're not at a time where we're replicating everything that we've always done all the time and saying, oh, we're just going to digitize exactly that. You have to re-envision it. So I think this year, if there's any time to do it, the technology is there and it's going to ramp faster than I think anybody that's not on that path is going to really wish they were.
So it is an interesting point that, for years, the physical supply chain has been ahead of the digital supply chain. And then in the last 5 years, at least, the digital supply chain has now overtaken it. And to some degree, we're probably lagging a little bit now on the physical supply chain because of AI and the potential for that. And so, Mitat, as you're thinking about, your plans for 2026 and 2027, how are you thinking about the technology that you have available to you in terms of where you need to go? And I know that, Arvado spent a lot of time with AutoStore and some of the latest technologies from a DC perspective, but there's still an overarching on top of that, which is, but are the supply chains actually running better?
So we call it Mission 500, where we are implementing robotics actually. We want to get to 500 robots in our warehouses globally within 18 months. And what we learned is you cannot operate these robots independently. So there's a lot of decision-making, quick decision-making required. Our systems, what we have, cannot manage that actually. And normally the robotics companies use their own control systems. So what we are doing is exactly what you're saying. We are putting a layer in, an AI layer which controls the robotics in our warehouses. Quick decisions, it's integrated in our system, in our workflows, and I think that is the only way how this can only work, if you have entire workflows somehow in the AI solution integrated. If you do it like on use cases basis, it will not help. It will not give you the ROI. And we will always stay also the robotics, what we have today, are totally not connected. So we need to connect them somehow.
So there is this autonomous layer that right now is missing, but it's a very interesting statistic. So in the US last year, there were approximately 30,000 robots implemented in manufacturing. In China last year, there was 222,000 robots implemented into manufacturing. So this is changing, and the technology is there to enable that. And I think that there's going to be a push from a US perspective and from a European perspective to really try and ramp this up a little bit more. But it starts to show what that's going to look like. But there's so much work to be done. You know, even when you look at the very latest figure robots and everything else, they're still doing repetitive tasks. And it's a very single element of a task that they're doing. Very interesting, but it seems to take a long time for training and everything else. Will Tesla do something else? Maybe this show next year we'll be sitting with a Tesla bot
And I know that there's a lot of companies here on the event actually providing robotic solution. So we implemented our first humanoids actually in our warehouses, which is awesome. And they operate pretty quickly, pretty independently.
No sick days, no cigarette breaks. They're just, the humanoid robots are there. Fantastic. Okay. Jeff.
Dave, what I always kind of think about is, I think for everybody in this room as well, that if you think about what AI can happen autonomously today, like in our own life, much less business, and you can start to see the possibilities in your life, whether it's, my car drives itself, what Alexa can do in making my life easier and such. And you think about the possibilities and go, wow, if it can do that, why can't that transport into my business and drive this another level of transformation? And are we actually thinking about what's available right there, right in front of us, and how we can apply it to solve different problems or see different problems?
So everything that we're talking about is this digital, I hate using the word transformation, but it is transformation at some level. But Ron, that then creates a whole different level of risk, because suddenly, and this is where AI has to get to. It can't just be processing tasks. It's going to get to the decision making, and it's going to start to be able to book its own shipments. It's going to start to understand the complexities of a disruption and do something with it. But with that inherently becomes the next level of risk from a supply chain perspective, because suddenly you've got another digital layer that has to be controlled in some way.
Yeah, correct. I think as Barry mentioned in the previous segment, it's an arms race. It is going to be an arms race for the foreseeable future to stay ahead of it, because as things get more automated, as more things are digitized, criminals are going to work to exploit that. That's just it's a fact that we have to get over. Staying ahead of the criminal network is tough, and it requires a lot of people with a lot smarter than me to figure it out. And but it is going to be something within the logistics and shipper communities that they're going to have to stay ahead of. And invest in technologies, invest in good partnerships, and have security at the forefront of decisions being made around their global supply chain.
So Jeff, you work for the biggest software company in the world. Microsoft has been at the forefront of bringing AI into the workplace. Has that changed your thinking in terms of what you need to be concerned about for supply chain in 2026, 2027?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's changed my thinking in the sense that traditionally we solve problems by, looking at the root cause, doing all this process work, and then saying, how can I deploy technology to help me solve it? And like we just talked about, I think there's a technology there that's a big, giant bag of tricks that you kind of go, how do I use this big bag of tricks and let it solve for me? In fact, seek out problems that I can't even see or think of solving, or potentially solve them in a way that's like, you know, what's the old thing? If you ask for it, how do I make a better car? Then the response would be, get a faster horse. You know, I think it has the ability to completely rethink things. And, you know, then there's an accountability factor that we need to rethink accountability structures in terms of how we orchestrate agents and things like that. And so my thinking has evolved quite a bit in the positive side in terms of it's just phenomenal what you can do with an unfiltered vision. And I think it's actually a lot easier to accelerate it. It's just, do we have the capability to digest it as fast as we can accelerate?
And Mitat, as you are, you know, at the cutting edge of this, are your customers demanding more from where's my AI-driven supply chain? Where are my robots? Is that a common ask?
Not common, I would say. Very specific clients are a bit more advanced, and they like to be part of the innovation journey actually with us, but not many of them. Last year was definitely a year of cost pressure for many of our clients, and you could also see why. I mean, when we compared the shipping volume, for example, it didn't even reach the previous year's amount actually for many of our clients. So the growth is only coming from new clients, new logos for us actually, not existing.
So when you think about the last 6 years, so 6 years ago, nearly to the day, we all went into lockdown, and COVID happened, supply chain became incredibly important. There was two key elements, two key dates for supply chain. One of them was around the 5th or 6th of March 2020, and the second one was March the 21st, 2021. Does anybody know what happened on March the 21st, 2021? Okay, on that day, there was a ship called the Ever Given that got stuck in the Suez Canal. And at the same time, over the next 24 hours, everybody in the entire world instantly became a supply chain expert. And for those of us who were practitioners, our lives became very complicated. But we learned a lot of lessons out of COVID, and we made a lot of statements coming out of COVID saying, the supply chain will never be this fragile again. The supply chain will never be this vulnerable again. What do we have to do to make sure that we never get caught by a black swan event? Now, I think sometime around 2023, there was a wave of complacency whereby the numbers were all changing again. We were becoming more of a cost center. We had to move back to our normal. 2024, 2025, we've been wavering a little bit there. But now coming into 2026, I feel that there's more energy. I feel that there's more opportunity. Am I just drinking too much of my own Kool-Aid here? Or what are you, like, you guys are leaders. You're managing multi-billion-dollar businesses. What are you seeing? What are you thinking coming into February of 2026? Mitat first.
So I do believe that this year, the 2025, it was a pause somehow. A lot of decisions were put on hold, important decision, that there's more clarity now. So that helps, obviously. Everybody knows tariffs are here, they will stay. We will still have like issues with skilled labor in the warehouse. The AI is not going anywhere. So there's definitely clarity, and people will make definitely more decisions, strategic decisions. That's my hope anyway, for our business for this year.
Okay, Jeff?
I think that the Kool-Aid tastes good. Like, I think it's right. I think there was a phase where it was sort of, wow, we can really handle anything. We overcame that. Everybody, a lot of companies actually overcame it. Albeit you don't know what demand wasn't satisfied and how perishable or non-perishable that demand was. right? And so, yeah, I think we've got a new wave. I don't think it's necessarily related. I just think we're on the cusp of the next industrial revolution or evolution, and I think it's hitting faster than most would have imagined. And so I think, speed opens up a lot of options and a lot of thinking, frankly. Because I wouldn't call things like a burning platform. I think it becomes more like a burning desire to make transformative change. And I think that's really where we are, and that's the energy you're feeling.
So, Ron, on the contra side to this, as we said earlier on, the criminals have been getting smarter and they've been consistently growing year on year. What are you concerned about going into 2026?
I see the threat environment, kind of continue to escalate. Every year we see a little bit different tactics, different threats. I think that's going to continue. The reason why I think that is the criminals are making too much money. There's too much profit, and the risk reward of cargo theft in today's world is turned on its head, where the criminals have the advantage and are going to continue to steal. And so I see that trend continuing. I see new entrants into the criminal world. For the first time, as Will mentioned, for the first time in a long time, we're seeing the intersection of cargo theft and other, criminal enterprises like, contraband or narcotics. And, we've been involved in a lot of recoveries where they're also finding, drugs, and weapons and cash. And, that's relatively new to the scene, in my opinion, where the criminals, it's attracting new entrants because of the profitability. Criminals that historically were just maybe drug traffickers or involved in other illicit activities are being attracted into the cargo theft world because of the profitability that they're seeing out there, and and the ability to move products very quickly. We have case studies where, in a matter of hours, these criminals have orchestrated 4 different moves of a stolen product, and to cover their trail, to get it into the hands of a buyer, or to move it to a location where they can sell it at a very high profit margin. That I don't see that going away anytime soon.
And this is, one of the big concerns that overhaul that we have coming into 2026 is exactly that. The high consequence cargo, the way that it moves through the criminal supply chains is getting very effective. Jeff Mitat, we're coming up on time. You have a room full of practitioners, some solution providers. What's the one piece of advice you would give them this early in the year, knowing the turmoil that we went through in 2025 and the fact that we already know a little bit about what's going to happen in 2026? What's the one piece of advice you would give to the senior people in the room? I'll ask Jeff first.
Invest in your data. I think build a data foundation that goes all the way across the supply chain. It's interesting because take logistics as an example. Knowing where different industries are in terms of the amount of data, logistics and transportation is actually one of the richest, data-rich across all industries, fields that there is. Is it used appropriately to drive the rest of the business? And so I think getting rigid around what the data is, how it's sanitized and organized is definitely not the enemy of agility. It will springboard it. So,
love that. Mitat.
So I do believe, and I hope that the companies will look into the AI more from a workflow perspective and organizationally. It's not a technical or technology question from my perspective. And I feel the same in our company, actually, that if we don't adjust from a cultural and organizational perspective, we will not get the benefits out of it. So we need to adjust, I think, also from organization, get somehow away from silos and go a bit more into where it really adds value, actually. I hope that's for us true, but also for our clients, actually.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you so much to Jeff Davison from Microsoft, for Mitat Eitendag from Arvado, and from Ron Green for joining me here from Overhaul. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.